Whenever I witness a black person believing that our plight is connected to the Bible and also believing that our condition is connected to the Willie Lynch slave syndrome, two literatures that I know for a fact are actually works of fiction, I cannot remain silent. Whenever I witness these things, it's literally like as disheartening as watching a black child marching into a real battlefield carrying a toy gun. I can't in good conscience remain silent when witnessing such profound ignorance. Our core problem is that the ignorant ones are stubbornly overconfident, and they fight against those of us who try to teach them the black liberating truth of our plight and condition. You know, usually people have the right to believe whatever they choose to believe, but that's a luxury that the oppressed doesn't have. The oppressed must gain a clear and accurate understanding of our plight and condition in order to liberate ourselves. Because if our understandings are flawed, then all liberating strategies and remedies that stem from those misunderstandings will also be flawed. This is why those of us who know the truth must teach African proverb. When we allow ignorance among our people to go unchecked, we're literally supporting the white society's mental enslavement of our people. We must therefore always tell the truth, even when it offends those of us that are ignorant. It's better to lose ignorant black friends for telling the black liberating truth than to endorse ignorant beliefs in order to hold on to ignorant black friends. We must speak the truth whether we're hated for it, berated for it, or whether it fills the room or clears it out. We must post the truth whether we're blocked for it or we're unfriended for it. We must teach the truth regardless of any consequences or who it offends. Because we're here to awaken a sleeping black sheep, not to comfort and appease the ignorant goats. Within this video, I'll provide proof that we're not inflicted by the Willie Lynch syndrome and that Willie Lynch never existed. Millions of black people are insisting that our minds have been mentally enslaved by slave syndrome as described within the Willie Lynch letter. The Willie Lynch letter is purported to be a verbatim account of a speech delivered by Willie Lynch to an audience gathered on the banks of the James River in Virginia 1712 regarding the management of slaves. Lynch, a slave owner, tells other slave masters that he had discovered a secret for controlling the black slaves by setting them against themselves. Now, if you believe that black people are being controlled and being manipulated to think in ways benefiting the white society by the Willie Lynch slave syndrome, it's because you are ignorant. Whenever people are ignorant, they'll always believe nonsense, and that's a fact. You would have to be ignorant to believe that myth because the Willie Lynch myth presents what would in fact be the least effective and least plausible method used for controlling generations of millions of people. It's simply not how true brainwashing is achieved. True brainwashing requires a system that's being constantly updated, reapplied, and reinforced upon the minds of a targeted population in order to remain effective. If not, the brainwashing effects would lessen with each new generation instead of worsening as we witness amongst our people. Logically, if our collective condition was caused by something that was done to our ancestors during slavery, it would have lessened with each passing new generation as we move further away from the era of slavery. But this isn't the case at all. We've in fact worsened. During the 1960s, African Americans implemented the most successful unified protests in U.S. history. It still remains unrivaled by any other group in U.S. history. Today, African Americans are now more divided than any previous time in U.S. history. During the 1960s, African Americans wore afros and braids and declared that black is beautiful, and we called ourselves brothers and sisters. Today, in direct contrast, millions are now wearing European weaves, bleaching our skins, and calling ourselves niggers and bitches. We also changed from knowing that white oppressive forces were our worst enemies to now insisting that it's ourselves that are now our worst enemies. If our current collective condition was truly connected to something done to our ancestors during slavery, logically, our symptoms would have lessened with each new generation as we move further away from slavery, instead of worsening as it has. There would be a natural deterioration of our symptoms. This is logical. Now, when critically thinking, it becomes clear to see that our condition has nothing to do with a silly slave syndrome myth. White governments don't want intelligent, critical thinking black populations. They instead only want black populations that are just smart enough to work, pay taxes, and fight within their wars, but that never critically think for ourselves, therefore can be misled to believe in a ridiculous Willie Lynch myth that actually negatively impacts our communities and that actually gives the white society greater power over us. Here's how and why it does this. Within the U.S. government's military doctrine on psychological warfare, it states that the most effective way to subdue and control a large targeted population without actually fighting them is by misleading them to believe that their core problem is an internalized one. When people are made to believe that their core problem is an internalized one, this shifts their collective aggressions away from their enemies and redirects it towards and against themselves. It also makes them resentful towards their own people. It divides their rights, and it makes them more compliant with the oppressor's dominance over their lives. In fact, many will even prefer it. This is exactly what accepting the Willie Lynch story does to black people. White oppressive forces needs black people believing that our core problem is an internalized one, that there's something inherently wrong with us, because it makes it much more easier to control and it prevents us from unifying against them. It's a psychological warfare tactic that is taught within all U.S. military war colleges. You know, sometimes it's easier to fool people than it's to show them that they've been fooled. Nonetheless, those of us who know the truth must teach African proverb. Willie Lynch never existed. The letter was actually written in 1970 by the late Dr. Kwabena Ashanti, who was from Durham, North Carolina. Dr. Ashanti confirmed it's a complete work of fiction. He described those symptoms based on in the letter, based on what he witnessed during the 1970s when he wrote the letter. This is why it appears so accurate. Willie Lynch is a complete work of fiction. This is also why when experts examined the letter, they found it contained modern words that were inconsistent with his 1700 date. Dr. Ashanti said that he wrote the letter in 1970 as a way to bring attention to what he called the inherent division within the black community. After Dr. Ashanti wrote it, white propagandists took it and spread it throughout the black communities. Because when black people believe and accepts it, that the Willie Lynch is true, it negatively impacts our communities and gives the white society greater power and control over our lives. The truth of our plighted condition is that in response to the unprecedented unified black protest movement during the 1960s, white oppressive forces deployed an ideological subversion system against the African American population. Ideological subversion is an offensive, insidious psychological warfare tactic that uses disinformation and misinformation as a weapon to change people's behaviors and beliefs in ways that are against their own self-interest. Presently, white government agents that specialize in psychiatry and propaganda works unrelentingly behind the scenes, manipulating the collective minds of the black masses. Under the disguise of merely preventing dissent from rising amongst the black population against the white status quo, these men govern our minds, molds our opinions, and shapes our perceptions in ways that serves and protects the system of white supremacy, even to an extent where we think in ways that are against our own self-interest. These men analyze and studies everything about the black population, our beliefs, our likes, our dislikes, our strengths, and our vulnerabilities. This surveillance information is gathered, and decisions are then made on which fraudulent stories to produce to best create certain psychological feelings amongst the black population that keeps us demoralized, divided, and most importantly, that keeps our collective aggression shifted away from the white society and redirected towards ourselves. This is all possible because people are like computers. All you have to do is keep giving them certain information every so often, and you can persuade an entire generation towards an applied objective. It doesn't matter if the information presented is untrue. Most black people will act upon it because they have all been given the same disinformation. The manipulation of the collective minds of targeted populations is not a conspiracy theory. It's a true, well-proven system that the ruling class uses to control the masses and targeted populations. They started deploying this particular program against the African American population in response to the unprecedented black protests demonstrated in the 1960s. It's how they prevent it from happening again. It's the truth that white oppressive forces don't want the black population to ever figure out, because it provides them with their most proficient weapon used for controlling and subjugating the black masses. Regardless of how intelligent people are, if it's possible to control the input into the collective minds of a targeted population, it's entirely possible to control what the targeted population will believe. The white society has exploited its monopoly over the input of information and media images that are systematically and repetitively fed into the collective minds of the black masses to manipulate black people to think in ways that serve and protect the system of white supremacy. It's literally like the old saying that the greatest trick the greatest trick of the devil was when he convinced the world to believe that he didn't exist. Likewise, the greatest trick that the devilish white society has done has tricked black people to believe that they're no longer subjugating, exploiting us, and oppressing us, and to believe that it's we that are now our own worst enemies. It's literally mental slavery. And those black people who don't critically think never notices their mental chains. If you don't think that white oppressive forces exploits their monopoly over information and media images that we systematically and repetitively receive to manipulate and shape our minds in ways that benefits themselves, you're extremely naive and you're totally clueless of your reality. The true hidden reality and facts are that the media is being used to constantly manipulate us. The educational system indoctrinates our minds. The entertainment industry is being used to distract us and negatively steer our culture. And religion is being used to subdue our critical thinking and make us passive. Collectively, these things are being used to mentally enslave us. And those black people who don't critically think never notices their mental chains. It's how the white society now protects itself from massive unified black retribution, given their horrific history brutalizing us. In order to see our reality, you have to stop allowing the white society to tell you what to think and start critically thinking for yourself. Critically think, and you'll see our reality, which is that the group of people who wrote the history books are the same ones that murdered our heroes and that have brutally exploited us for over 400 years. Certainly when history is being taught by these same group of people, they're not going to teach us true history. Oppressors never teach a true history to those they brutalized throughout history. They always teach those that they brutalized a false version of history that makes the oppressors appear as having been more humane and lesser immoral throughout history than they truly in fact were. This is a logical fact, because to do so would otherwise be directly against the interests of the white society. Therefore, we can say with the utmost confidence and certainty that the history we're taught has been whitewashed by the white society. It's not true history. It's also been whitewashed to make themselves appear lesser, appear more significant throughout history than they truly in fact were. Doing so provides them with a platform that endorses their current position of white dominance. So therefore, they make themselves appear more significant. In doing so, they've turned many black historical figures white and have given themselves credit for most inventions and achievements made by black people. It provides them with a platform that endorses their position of white supremacy right now. So therefore, the history we're taught is a lie. The white society then creates this lie, and then they impose it upon society as being a fact. It's the most elaborate, worst gaslighting in history. Not only have they whitewashed their history books, they've also whitewashed the perception of reality. Public perception of reality are shaped by the narratives that are repeatedly fed into a society. Therefore, all that's required to distort the perception of reality is to repetitively feed distorted narrative into a society. The public at large will then start functioning based upon those distorted narratives rather than the true reality. This is what's called an illusionary truth effect. This is what the white society has done to black people. They repetitively feed us distorted narratives into our collective minds that conveys the subliminal message that we must trust and respect and revere whites, and we should fear and distrust and perceive ourselves as our worst enemies. We're constantly receiving those in propaganda, subliminally embedded into our minds. Now, whenever oppressors are controlling the information that are being systematically fed into the minds of the oppressed, they always feed the oppressed disinformation that are designed to keep the oppressed thinking and behaving in ways that benefits their oppressors. More specifically, it's how they keep our collective aggression shifted from the white society and directed towards ourselves. This is why millions of black people now revere Caucasians and perceive ourselves as being our worst enemies, in spite of such a brutal history to the contrary. Such as witness within the U.S. criminal justice system, in which black people are still being disproportionately incarcerated, given stiffer sentences, and we are more likely than any other racial group to be brutalized and to be killed by white police officers while in custody and while unarmed. It's also why we also witness within most traffic courts, in which black people are the most heavily ticketed group that generates revenues for the city. Even within cities that are predominantly white, black people makes up the majority of the defendants appearing in traffic court. Have you ever noticed that? Black people are also the constant revenue generators from most white cities across the nation. Black people are also charged higher interest rate on all loans, more than whites. These noted injustices are tactics that are presently being used by the white society to continue their subjugation and exploitation of black people. When they feed us these societal narratives, their goal is to keep us thinking, keep our collective aggressions faced towards ourselves. When you're oppressing a people, you do all these things to a people, you have to keep feeding them fraudulent propaganda that keeps their collective aggression shifted away from the oppressors and redirected towards ourselves. That's what's being done to us in the media. This is the true reason why we're also constantly inundated with the propaganda campaigns about black on black crime. Critically think. Some things are so obvious that it's only by not critically thinking that it cannot be seen. When critically thinking, based upon facts, reality, and historical evidence, it then becomes clear that the white society has never given a damn about black people killing each other. They never have, nor will they ever will. The only reason why they've dedicated so much of their time, energy, and finances into those constant news reports about black on black crime is because they actually serve and protect the interests of the white society. They're deliberately designed to demoralize us, to divide us, to make us afraid of each other, and to create black self-loathing, and they keep us believing that we're our worst enemies. It keeps our collective aggression shifted from the white society and redirected towards ourselves. That's why we're constantly hearing about black on black crime, black on black crime, black on black crime. It's over-exaggerated and over-propagated. The system of white supremacy now strives and operates like a well-oiled machine. And nothing is being done to free us from the black people's matrix because we no longer have true black leaders. We instead now only have puppet black leaders that actually works in behalf of the white establishment. Their job is merely to give us the illusion that we have representation, that we have true leaders, but we no longer have true leaders. This is the reality. Now, to believe otherwise, you're like that kid who's trying to go into war with a toy gun. We have to understand the truth. Once we understand the truth, share the truth, teach the truth, and now we can formulate our liberation based upon the truth of our reality. One love and peace.